So that's kind of a crazy story. Of all of the stories during the course of this series, this one was the most difficult one for me, but I think I have something good to share with you, so we'll work that through in just a few moments. I want to talk for a minute about legacy. Do we have an idea when we hear this word or when we speak this word what it means? If someone is leaving a legacy behind? Sometimes it can be a gift. It could be money or it could be a piece of property. I think most of the time when we're talking about leaving a legacy, we're thinking more of character, reputation, more like, did you leave this earth a better place than the way that you found it when you came? What did your life speak to as you passed it on to the generations who come behind you? What kind of legacy did you leave? Now, most of the time, we don't think about such things until somebody dies, or perhaps as we're getting older. You know, I never thought about these things when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s. Now that I'm in my 50s and on the back nine, I'm starting to think a little bit more about what is it that I'm leaving behind. And I think as you get older, you probably have those thoughts, but they're never more potent than when you are at like somebody's funeral and somebody's talking about this person and you're remembering their life and you're remembering their legacy, what they leave behind. So I thought on the front end, for those of you guys who've been with us, we've been in this series called The Story of Elijah, a man just like us. And we've been looking at his life and listening to it and learning from it and trying to make application from what is a 3,000-year-old story. And what I thought we could do on the front end is, for those of you guys who've been with us, is just talk for a little bit about what kind of legacy Elijah leaves us. Like, what do we remember in just these past 5 weeks about this man? What has he done with his life that will speak to your life as you move forward? Does anybody have any lasting impressions of this guy? Anything that you think when you think about his life? I know that typically when we come here and we listen, probably by about Tuesday or Wednesday, Elijah's life is in the rear view a little bit. But I wonder if there are any lasting things that you take from this guy's life. Anybody have something? Carrie, what do you remember about Elijah and his legacy? Yeah. He's very human. There are things about him that if you were to isolate, you would say, wow, that's pretty incredible. But also if you were to walk down the road and isolate other spots, you would say, wow, that's pretty awful. Right? There's a mixture of his greatness and his fallenness. Yeah, Janae. Yeah. Yeah. Here's a guy that's super courageous. He stands in the face of one of the most evil and wicked and powerful people of his day. He challenges him. There are times where he has these great victories over the prophets of Baal. He calls down fire from the heavens. When he prays, the heavens shut up. For 3.5 years, there's this guy who walks with power, but in a moment, on the heels of a great success, fear finds its way into his life and it causes him to run from his life. And it's amazing to me as you think about it. It's why he's just like us. You can have these great moments of incredible success and you turn the corner and you're just running from your life. Yeah, he's a very human person. I think in a way we could relate a lot with him. Very powerful moments and very weak moments. But he is one of the great prophets of the Old Testament, and his life definitely has spoken to me over the course of the last 5 weeks. I want us, as we're moving forward, to look at and think about this last story, because I think when he's walking with Elisha, I think he's thinking about legacy. Now, the last time that we found him, last week, he had basically run 350 miles away from where he was supposed to be. He was incredibly afraid, and he was in despair. In fact, he wanted God, he prayed, just kill me now. He wanted to die. And as he sat in his own despair, God encountered him, and he revealed to him in a very quiet whisper that he wanted him to re-engage his life. There was at some point where the things that he was running from that he needed to return to, and he gave him 3 things that he wanted him to do. He wanted him to go and anoint Hazael, a king of a neighboring nation. He wanted him to go and anoint Jehu to replace Ahab, and he wanted him to go and anoint Elisha to take over his national prophetic ministry. He was going to retire. And so the very first thing that he does is he goes and he finds Elisha. And as he finds Elisha, Elisha is a farmer, and he is plowing. And he goes and lays his mantle over him, and he calls him out to a new way of living, a new way of life, of ministry. He's calling him to a different vocation. And Elisha leaves everything. He burns the plows. There's no looking back. He receives what Elijah has for him. And then for the next 11 or 12 years, he basically becomes his apprentice. He works with him, and he watches him, and he learns from him. And that's where we pick up today's story. Susan was just reading that to you. But between where we left him last week and this week, there's about 11 or 12 years that have passed. And now Elijah's at that place where he is looking to pass on his ministry. He's looking to leave a legacy. And I want to reread it and stop in parts and just think about what's going on. And then at the end, we'll make some application, okay? So, as we pick the story back up, it says, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were traveling from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to Bethel. But Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you. So they went down together to Bethel. The group of prophets from Bethel came to Elisha and asked him, did you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today? Of course I know, Elisha answered, but be quiet about it. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to Jericho. But Elisha replied again, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you. So they went on together to Jericho. And then the group of prophets from Jericho came to Elisha and asked him, did you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today? Of course I know, Elisha answered, but be quiet about it. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to the Jordan River. But again Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you. So they went on together. 50 men from the group of prophets also went and watched from a distance as Elijah and Elisha stopped beside the Jordan River. Now, let's just stop for a second. What of that speaks to you? There's this repetition of something that happens over and over again. What's going on? Have you ever noticed in Elijah's life that he is a bit of a loner? Right? Do you remember when he was running for his life, how he told his servant, stay here? And his servant at that point listened to him, and he went on by himself, and he deepened his isolation and his separation and his alienation from himself and from God. Elijah was oftentimes just a loner, and he wanted to be by himself. And so at the end of his life, he has this partner, this apprentice that he's been working with for 11, 12 years. And as they're going from place to place, from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho to the Jordan, every time he says to him, listen, just stay here. I'm going to go on ahead. God has a plan for me. But this time, his partner doesn't leave him alone. He says, no way. Wherever you go, I'm going. I'm with you to the bitter end. And when they get to each stop, there are these group of prophets. There's a school of prophets in each of the towns. And when they get to the town, each of the prophets come out and say what? They say, hey, did you know that today's the day that the Lord is going to take your master away? And he's like, yeah, shut up. He's like, I don't want to hear that, right? Every single time they come out. Now, how did they know what was going down? Do you ever, like when you hear the story, you think, who let them in on this secret? But they were prophets. Maybe God was speaking to them. Who knows? But it's interesting to me that at every town that they stop, there are these group of people that come out and kind of have the inside scoop on what's about to go down. And Elisha's like, of course I know that. Just shut up. I don't want to deal with that anymore. Now, he might be sad or he might be irritated. Who knows? It's hard to tell. But as he has these encounters, what's important for you to know is that I think what Elijah is doing with Elisha is he is taking him from place to place to place. In all total, that last day, it will be about 25 miles. So they basically run a marathon. And as they go from place to place, there is a significance in each spot that they stop. And I wonder, this is maybe just a little creative license, but I wonder if Elijah is not reminding Elisha about the legacy of his people, because each of these spots is a reminder of a specific act where God's people and God engaged in a way where there is a significant memory for them not to forget. So let's start with Gilgal. Why did they start in Gilgal? Well, Gilgal, for those of you who don't remember or won't know, was the place of covenant between God and His people. When they had been slaves in Egypt for some 400 years, and they had moved from a place of their slavery, and they were free, they wandered in the wilderness for some 40 years, trying to figure out what it meant to be free and what it meant to move forward. And as they did, eventually a generation of people would die out because they didn't have the faith to believe what God had promised them would come true. But eventually, under the leadership of Joshua, they crossed the Jordan into the Promised Land, and they moved into this space, and the very first place that they settled was Gilgal. Now, Gilgal was a place where they initiated the covenant, where circumcision occurred. It was a time of setting them apart. It was a time of rolling away their shame, rolling away the past of all those years where they had lived in bondage. It was a setting forth into a new way of being. And they marked that by circumcision. Gilgal was the place where they became set apart. It was the moment where they were all in. And I can't help but think that when Elijah is taking Elisha on this trip, that they start there. And he must be saying to Elisha, remember, this is the place when our people finally left their bondage. And they finally moved into a place where they set themselves apart and their shame was rolled away and they began a new way of living. This Gilgal was the beginning. And I can't imagine, as he is sharing that, if Elisha is now thinking, my master is leaving me today, and today's the beginning for me. This is the legacy of my people. What will my legacy be? Well, they move from Gilgal and they go to Bethel. Bethel was renamed. It used to be called Luz, but it was renamed by Jacob, who once camped out there and who had a dream. And in that dream, there was a ladder with angels ascending and descending. And where he heard the voice of God, and God said to him, you are my blessed son. Look to the east, look to the west, look to the north, look to the south. I'm giving you all this land for you and for the generations who come behind you. Bethel was the place of blessing. Beth means house, El means God, house of God. This is where Jacob said he met with God. So Gilgal was the place of being set apart and rolling away the shame. Bethel was the house of God where there was connection and communion, where when he rested, God spoke to him. And much like in Gilgal, also there was a monument of stones set up there for him to even point to and look at and say, we've gone from being set apart now to a place of blessing. And then they go from Bethel to Jericho, and Jericho was the very first city. You will remember, those of you who remember the story, that it wasn't by military might or strategy that the walls of Jericho would fall down. It was by faith. God had told Joshua and his armies to march around Jericho 6 times, and on the 7th time, the walls would fall. And I can't help but think that Elijah must be pointing to this spot and saying, these were where the walls that once stood to this city, the walls of our enemy, came down in the face of what were our greatest fears. We decided not by our own strength and not by our own intellect, but by an act of our faith, that as we walked around these walls, that they would one day fall. This was where the people of Israel learned to fight their battles by faith. So there's being set apart, there's blessing, there's faith. And then faith ultimately finds its expression as they get to the edge of the Jordan River. And he will remind him about how when Joshua got to the Jordan, how they walked through wet places on dry ground. That place where they seemed to be needing their faith the most before they moved into an epic new life, that there was going to be this place where they were going to have to exercise their faith in a new way. And that's exactly what happens as they get to this spot. Listen to what the rest of the story says. So 50 men from the group of prophets also went and watched from a distance as Elijah and Elisha stopped beside the Jordan River. Then Elijah folded his cloak together and struck the water with it. He took his cloak off, he hits the water, the river divided, and the two of them went across on dry ground. If the story ended there, that's just incredible and kind of freaky, right? I mean, you're going to take off your garment, you're going to hit the water's going to open, and you're going to walk through on dry ground, but it doesn't end there. When they came to the other side, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken away?" And Elisha replied, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit and become your successor." "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah replied. "If you see me when I'm taken from you, then you will get your request, but if not, then you won't." As they were walking along and talking, suddenly a chariot of fire appeared, drawn by horses of fire. A chariot of fire, but drawn by horses of fire. It drove between the two men, separating them, and Elijah was carried by a whirlwind into heaven. That's freaky. I don't know about you, when I get to the end of my life, if I had the choice between like cancer taking me out or a heart attack taking me out or a chariot of fire, I think I'd take the chariot of fire. That'd be a cool way to go. So he gets to this place and they're at the Jordan and he takes off his cloak and he hits the water and they walk through. It's reminiscent of when Joshua took the people through. He's been reminding them step by step. They get to the Jordan, it's the last place. And then he's like, so it's about time. This time he doesn't say, shut up. He says, it's about time. Anything else I can do for you? Because he's poured into his life for 11 or 12 years. This is it. And he said, yeah, everything I've seen in you, I want what you have, but double. Oh, is that all? He said, yeah, I want to be your successor. I feel like I've learned from you. I feel like you've shown me what I need to know, and I feel like the nation needs a prophet that will encounter the difficult people and the difficult places and express faith so that we can continue on the journey that we have started for so many years. He said, so if if you could do anything for me, it would be just to anoint and bless me as your successor. And I don't even know why it mattered whether he saw him when he left or he didn't saw him, but that's part of the story. I don't know. You can figure that part out. But anyway, there's some act of his needing to be there, and as he is there and they're walking and talking, all of a sudden this chariot of fire with these horses of fire, I mean, I don't know, what do you do with that? And be like, whoa! And Elijah just gets in, and the chariot just takes him away. And I don't know what you want to do with that, but basically, kind of the way he came in sort of in a whirlwind, and he goes out in a whirlwind. His life is gone, and he leaves. And Elisha is there just thinking about what's next for him. If you follow it, he's a bit distraught. If you follow the story on out, he's a bit distraught because this is his mentor, this is his guy, this is his dude. He's been with him, and he's the one who called him away from his farm and his plowing. He gave him a new life. And I can't help but think as Elisha is sitting there and watching all of this unfold, I just can't help but think about legacy. As he's processing what it meant, Elijah's life to him, and as we did on the front end, as we thought about what his life means to us, I can't help but just pose to you about your own. Because I think that's what this chapter is about. I think it's a closing of the story. And while each of us aren't at the place where our story has finished, I think what's far more important than the way we come in or go out is what happens in between. And as Elisha is reflecting on the legacy that is left as they go from place to place to place, I wonder if in your own life, as you think about it, what you're doing with the in-between. And I think each of those towns are significant to Elisha and significant to us. I think there has to be some Gilgal in our life. I think there has to be some place at which we make a conscious decision that we're not going to be half-hearted with our faith anymore. There is this circumcising moment where we say to God, you know what? I am all in. Whatever may come my way, whatever hardship, whatever difficulty, whatever trial, whatever situation, I'm not turning back. I am marking the line, and this is the place where my shame is rolled away. This is the place where I will no longer be in bondage to my sin. This is a place where it will no longer have mastery over me. I am drawing a line in Gilgal, and I am beginning my legacy by no longer being a slave. I think for us there has to be that moment in which we say that. There has to be that place where we just commit ourselves. And it's not as if we won't at some point maybe miss the mark or fall back or maybe not do it in the way that we had hoped to, but there does have to be a defining moment where we say, this is just it. And I just wonder if you've had one of those Gilgal moments. And if you hadn't, I would just say to you, that's the place you start. Where your heart is circumcised, where you get serious about what you're doing, where there is some sense of priority that you give to your relationship with God. I think leaving a lasting legacy, one that you would want to pass on to those who come behind you, starts there. But I don't think it ends there. I think that's really the beginning place. I think you then travel to Bethel, the house of blessing, the house of God, the place where you open your life. You began to dream new dreams. You began to see new visions. You began to open to the possibility of what God can do with a set-apart life. You began to trust that there's more than what you have had previous to this point in your life. and you trust that God is opening a way for you. It's a place of blessing, but you have to be open to receive that, to see that, to experience that. I think Gilgal goes to Bethel, goes to Jericho, where at some point you decide, you know what, I have to now exercise my faith. This seems ludicrous in this spot, about as ludicrous as it is to walk around walls and think they're going to fall down. But in this spot in my life, I'm going to apply some faith. I'm going to work that muscle so that I can grow and I can become the person that I want others behind me to see and to be. At some point, if I'm going to call myself a person of faith, I'm actually going to have to exercise my faith. I think Jericho is the place of looking at the strongholds and the walls that your enemies have placed before you and saying, you're not so bad. You're not so big. You're not so rough. You're not so tough. This is the place where we apply faith. And then finally, when we get to the place where we are entering promise, where we are going to leave it all behind, where we can look back and say, God, if anything, what I want people to know is that there is nothing that shall separate your promise from me. And I don't know how you're going to open this water up, but I'm going to walk right through and trust that you're going to take me into the place that you want me to go. I just wonder about our own legacies. I wonder about where we are in that journey. I wonder about what it is that we want to leave the people behind us. What do we want our legacy to be? And I don't think you're too young, those of you guys who are middle school, high school, I don't think you're too young to start thinking about it. Because you don't build a legacy overnight. It takes a long time in the same direction to get to the place that you want to go. And I don't think you're ever too old to consider that perhaps even if you've not left the legacy that you would have hoped to, until you have, as long as you have life and breath in your body, you have the capacity to turn and twist the direction that you're going to where you want to go and who you want to be. So I just want to ask you at the end of the series, who do you want to be and where do you want to go? What is the legacy that you're wanting to leave? Everybody wants kind of their 15 minutes of fame, but after that's over, what do you got? What are you going to leave? I think far more important than any money we would leave behind or any land we would leave behind is the character and the reputation and the contribution that we've made. So do you want to be courageous? Do you want to be kind? Do you want to be a person of peace? Do you want to leave the people around you better than the way that you found them? What is the contribution that you want to make? It's far more important than your vocation. What is your contribution that you want to leave? How do you want to be remembered? And if you're not happy at this point in your life with how you would be remembered, then today's the day where you do something about it, where you begin to move in the direction of the place that you want to go and the person you want to be. It all starts at Gilgal, and it ends at the Jordan. But wherever it is and whoever it is that you want to be, I want you to be serious today and understanding that there's still work for you to do. So you might as well get started today. Or, if not started, just conscious of where you're going and continue in the direction that maybe you've already started. Because you might be on the way. You just might have a few more miles to travel before it gets solidified. Elijah doesn't leave us the legacy of somebody who was perfect. He's very human. He's just like us. But 3,000 years later, we're talking about this dude. So what if 3,000 years later, we're talking about you? How cool would that be? For all the right reasons we're talking about you. Man, that would be cool. Cooler than your entry, where you blow in and have the mic drop, and cooler than your exit with the fiery chariots and horses. It's what you do in between your entry and exit that matters, and what's going to have people talking about you long after you're gone. So what do you want your legacy to be? I want you to think about that as we pray. Lord, we thank you for people who mark our lives, who speak to us, who teach us, who inspire us, who help us to be better. We thank you for Elijah and for the last 6 weeks that we've had now. And now it's time for us to think about our own story. Wherever it is that we find ourselves, would you help us with pen in hand to continue to write or rewrite the story that we want? As you call us to a new way of being,